It's a privilege to be here, and thank you for inviting me. Greetings from Nashville, Tennessee. I'm being taped today from inside the Nashville Public Library in the Grand Reading Room. Thank you to NPL's Production Services team. I promise to provide you something to think about as you consider the state of American libraries. In today's brief conversation, I will quickly cover information and ideas to help you better understand what the cultural and political climate is for U.S. libraries of all types. We need to be clear from the outset that what our libraries are facing today are unprecedented attempts at censorship. There's a cultural assault going on against our libraries, librarians, and democracy. But first, I would like to provide a brief thumbnail sketch of what libraries, primarily public libraries, are facing in their day-to-day environment, a little historical perspective on democracy, intellectual freedom, and censorship, and some basics of intellectual freedom, the book challenge atmosphere the libraries are facing in a rapidly changing landscape, and the approach we decided to take at the Nashville Public Library last spring. Like you, we are in a library environment of business not as usual, or not what we knew it to be even 5 years ago. If we were doing a New York Times list of top issues facing libraries, you would most likely find that for many, library budgets are healthy, but the pandemic impacted libraries as they did all workplaces, and we are still in a recovery mode. Staffing is a challenge, with libraries struggling to offer competitive wages and benefits. The debate about library credentials, the MLIS versus a master's in education, is a common debate. Diversity, equity, and inclusion is a dominant subject being addressed internally and in programming. Security, active shooters weigh heavy on the minds of librarians. Our libraries are public and wide open, with not enough security staff or supporting laws to deal with the uniquely American problem of gun violence. Libraries are thoughtful as they look at defining change in service priorities. Libraries, more than ever, are being asked to address community challenges of homelessness, all levels of community needs, literacy, after-school education, citizenship, and the list goes on. Our funds for collections are stretched. A good part of that funding, which resides in materials collections in libraries, is being diverted from print resources to support digital collections. There are various pricing models for ebooks that creates cost inequities for libraries as they attempt to meet their customers' demands for digital. Libraries like Nashville relied solely on digital for a time during the pandemic, which has carried over and accelerated that demand in the post-2020 environment. In December 2022, 65% of NPL circulation was digital. As a result, the collection budget used for hard copy is being allocated to digital at a greater rate than previously. This is all occurring in an environment of rapidly increasing book challenges to school and public libraries. Frankly, librarians are stressed and concerned about the future of the free public library, school libraries, academic libraries, as well as free, accurate information. It impacts publishers and the library marketplace. My personal intellectual freedom career really began in the 1980s. I became involved with state association and American Library Association committees dealing with intellectual freedom and the ALA Office of Intellectual Freedom and its staff, and later the Freedom to Read Foundation Board. At the time, it felt like we were mainly working through parental challenges around women's rights, internet access, privacy, and sex, drugs, and rock and roll, literally. Sex and books parents didn't want their children to read and see, MTV videos, parental rating systems for movies, and filtering were all fair game. I personally didn't get a sense that there was a galvanized, organized effort other than the American Eagle Forum to ban books like what we are seeing today. More of a concern by some parents regarding what their children were reading, seeing, and hearing. Of course, historically, the 1950s and the McCarthy era was a very different story for our country. As a foundational point, when U.S. librarians engage in intellectual freedom discussions, They often turn to the Library Bill of Rights. A few highlights from this document include: the American Library Association affirms that all libraries are forums for information and ideas, and that the following basic policies should guide their services. Books and other library resources should be provided for the interest, information, and enlightenment of all people of the community the library serves. Libraries should provide materials and information presenting all points of view on current and historical issues. Libraries should challenge censorship in the fulfillment of their responsibility to provide information and enlightenment. Libraries should cooperate with all persons and groups concerned with the resisting abridgment of free expression and free access to ideas. A person's right to use a library should not be denied or abridged because of origin, age, background, or views. And all people, regardless of origin, age, background, or views, possess a right to privacy and confidentiality in their library use. Many library materials in the U.S. are challenged based on an assertion that the material is obscene. The definition of what is obscene or illegal to have in a public library is defined by a Supreme Court doctrine or three-part test, referred to as the Miller test. It states that most pornography is not legally obscene. In other words, most pornography is protected by the First Amendment of the U.S. Bill of Rights. To be obscene, pornography must, at a minimum, depict or describe patently offensive, hardcore sexual conduct. The U.S. is currently in a deeply antagonistic culture war generated by our political, partisan, and societal differences. We are a nation divided over important issues in K-12 education, including which books students should be able to read in public school. This has spilled over into public and academic libraries. Opposition to materials on subjects range from anti-police, LGBTQIA+, sexual conduct, emphasis on social justice, to use as racial slurs, anti-Semitism, and promoting a religious viewpoint. During the annual recognition of Banned Books Week last year, ALA reported that 1,835 unique titles had been targeted between January and the end of October in 2022. We also know that only a small percentage of book challenges are reported to ALA. Among hundreds, there are location-specific problems in Bonners Ferry, Idaho, and Lano, Texas, Patnos, Michigan, and the state of Louisiana. Librarians are overwhelmed with proposed state laws and political action driven by well-organized, so-called family values groups, such as the Moms for Liberty, Texans for Liberty, People for Parents, and No Left Turn. These groups are dedicated to disrupting lessons and the availability of ideas on race and gender in books and other media. In Bonners Ferry, Idaho, the director resigned last year. The library trustees face a recall. A vocal group of activists is demanding the banning of more than 400 books from the library's shelves. Many of the targeted books are about gender or sexuality. Conservatives have apparently come into this community promoting a specific set of standards and their values agenda. They carry guns to library board meetings and school board meetings. A local realtor said this: "My job is to protect our kids from sexual deviants who will be drawn into our library if inappropriate sexual material is on our library shelves." The realtor is an occasional contributor to a website called Redoubt News, which caters to a growing group in northern Idaho of self-described, God-fearing, liberty-loving patriots. In western Michigan, at the Patnos Library in Jamestown Township, locals voted earlier this year to defund the library over books with LGBTQ themes. The renewal funding levy was defeated based upon the library board's refusal to censor its collection. Physical threats have been made against the library and library staff on social media. It has been suggested that the library be physically and forcibly shuttered. The library is attempting to raise private funds to keep the library open. At the request of ALA, I have personally interviewed and counseled librarians facing similar issues in the state of Louisiana. I want to be clear. U.S. librarians understand that the final authority for what a child reads is with the parent. What we don't agree with is that one parent or group of parents gets to make the decision for all others by banning books. It still holds that we believe in providing the right book for each person and each family. Censorship groups are effective at creating policy in state houses, local government, school boards, and library boards. They influence local groups and are creating a sea shift in communities that already question the value of free thought and discussion around government, ideas, and lifestyle. In The Atlantic on August 30th last year, writer Tom Nichols discussed the word fascism in a column called A Pre-Fascist Interlude. One of his comments was, "We cannot let our understandable fear of words such as fascism scare us out of talking about the reality staring us in the face." This audience today may be much more aware of the implications of that statement than the U.S. audience might be. In April last year, the Nashville Public Library ran a highly successful campaign to sign up library card holders under the banner of a limited edition library card, I Read Banned Books. In my I Read Banned Books op-ed that appeared in our local newspaper, The Tennessean, I made the following comments concerning the state of Tennessee's General Assembly and its passage of the censorship legislation and the general atmosphere around book banning in Tennessee. These measures are frustrating in their immediate impact and terrifying in their potential for growth. If you suppress one book, one author, one topic, where does it end? What could be perceived as offensive or inappropriate tomorrow? And why stop at school libraries? I want Nashvillians to know Nashville Public Library will always respect your freedom to read, to independently determine what you read and don't read, and to exercise your role in determining what your children read. But what we as librarians and readers cannot accept is the idea that a few people have the right to decide what is appropriate for everyone. Throughout the U.S., librarians, library boards, school boards, and friends of libraries are working with and developing methods to stem the tide of book censorship in all types of libraries. ALA developed the Unite Against Book Bans campaign with messaging and toolkits for librarians. Check out its website. Research tells us that the majority of Americans are opposed to book banning. My op-ed last year on I Read Banned Books began like this. The freedom to read is continuously under attack. Private books and public authorities are working to remove or limit access to reading materials, to censor content in schools, to label controversial views, to distribute lists of objectionable books or authors, and to purge libraries. These actions apparently rise from a viewpoint that the national tradition of free expression is no longer valid, that censorship and suppression are needed to counter threats to safety or national security, as well as to avoid the subversion of politics and the corruption of morals. This is the beginning of the Freedom to Read statement. The American Library Association and the Association of American Publishers first released the Freedom to Read statement in 1953. Librarians and publishers have always been in the trenches together, but this statement could well have been written today. It's happening in the United States. I wish you all a productive and informative meeting, and I thank you for having me here today. Goodbye.